a new area of the research is this idea of social and emotional. And the idea, and why I use the term fitness, is because, you know, physical, like, has anyone ever heard that physical fitness is important? Heard of that? Well, you know, at one point in our history of the science, we didn't know that. We didn't know it was important to get, you know, physical fitness, and it led to longevity and all sorts of recovery from illness. And I think right now we're in that same place with social and emotional, that the idea of developing a sense of self-regulation, understanding of emotions, learning how to get along with others, those are the same things that we should actually practice every day and use in an intentional way to develop our fitness in the social emotional realm. So I really want to talk about that, and also talk about one of the recent research, some really interesting recent science that we know about the importance of relationships and the importance of how these social emotional skills can be promoted. So here's a quote that I like to use, that educating the mind without educating the heart is no education at all. Who do you think said this? Oh, you didn't think I'd be quizzing you, did you? Who do you think? Oh, so you've seen this before. Aristotle, correct. No one's ever gotten that correct the first time. Yes. So I bring this in because Aristotle, it was, you know, centuries ago, this idea. It was already part of education, this idea that, you know, promoting things like self-awareness and social awareness and empathy in school is integral to education. But really, it's the past few years where we have the science to support that, that actually your emotions and how you feel affect what you learn. When you're in a positive mood state, for example, you actually retain more information. When you're happy, actually I should let you know, there's some research showing that when teachers are grading papers and they're in a positive mood, they actually give higher marks. So there's all sorts of science that's now coming out about how our learning is so affected of how we feel and how connected we are, how safe we feel. So I'm going to start with this story. Stacy had mentioned that I started off my educational career as a middle school teacher. My background is in elementary education at first, and then I wanted to work at a place with adolescents who might be facing some risks. So I taught in an alternative high school. Have any of you heard of alternative high schools? I'm imagining a few of you have. And I bring this up because, you know, this is before I went back to graduate school and got all the research and theory, and it was really my experiences teaching with these students that raised so many curiosities for me, and they taught me so much. And in fact, I would go back, I would say today, if I could go back to tell them, that they've influenced my entire academic career, well, personal as well. They taught me so much about how to, what they needed to learn, how to be a better person, so much. But I'm going to tell you one story about one of the students. I'm not sure if any of you have had challenging students before. But then there was Bill Kabakovich. He was my tornado. He was the bane of my existence. He was the kid who walked into the classroom and just disrupted everything. He interfered with everyone's learning. He knocked things on the floor. He threw pencils down. He, you know, just moved around and created chaos. And in fact, the days that Bill was absent, I could say this now, I was happy, because he was such a disruption, and I felt like I could never connect with him. I could never come to do any work, and I'm sure, I mean, in retrospect, it's how long it took me to think about this, but in retrospect, he made me feel incompetent. I think that was really what it was about. I felt incompetent. I couldn't reach him. Until one day, there I give Bill, he comes into class, I give him this reading sheet where we were reading a story, and he had to write like 10 sentences about the story. And I'm sure when I handed it to him, I rolled my eyes a bit, because I was like, here, do this, like, you know, because he'd never done any work. Half an hour later, I'm sitting at my desk, and he comes back to me, and he puts a paper in front of me, and there it is, completed, totally completed. And next to each of the sentences is a tiny drawing in pencil that is like phenomenal, that somehow captures some part of that sentence. And for me, when I started looking at that, and I just have to say I'm enamored, anybody who has artistic talent, I don't have any, I looked at it, and in my head, I suddenly saw Bill is not this failure at school. He's a gifted artist who's been misunderstood, and no one's recognized his talent. And I started going on and on to him. I looked up at Bill, and I'm like, oh my goodness, I had no idea you could do this kind of artwork. Like, you are so talented. How did you do this? And I could see Bill just, we'd never had this kind of interaction, and you could see this smile of pride on his face and him standing a bit taller. And as I went on and on about his amazing capability and talent and things, and it was that moment that I really learned a few things. One, I really learned that how I respond to kids is what determines how they respond to me. So when I could switch it, I could actually change his response to me. That I had this power in how when I was connected, that I could actually have that response. The second thing that I learned, and it was a really important lesson for me, was that every child that comes in front of me has a gift. They have a talent. They have something. And it might be hidden, and some might really hide it very well, but they have something, and it's our job, my job, all of ours, to surface that, to uncover it, to figure out what it is. And it might not be related to school. And how do we provide opportunities for that? And I think the other thing is I learned so much is that when I really paid attention how much I could learn from the students. It wasn't just about me teaching them. It was about them teaching me. And it was really that opportunity to learn from Bill, to learn how I could be a better person, how I could stop feeling frustrated and get beyond that. And the things that it taught me really was some key messages that I now try and go. To find something you like about every child. Like, what is that? If that's your intention, to think about, okay, today I'm going to find something, that kid who gets under your skin. What is that? And always lead with compassion. The idea is that children and youth do not come before us and act with problem behavior because they're just thinking they want to aggravate us. But they come with a reason for why they have that behavior. They might not have the skills to express it. They might not be able to have the ability. If a child came in front of you, a young child or an older child who did not have reading skills, you would not punish them for not having the right reading skills yet, or math skills. You'd say, well, we need to give you some more information. It's the same with the social and emotional. The idea of assuming they might not yet have that capacity to understand emotions, to regulate their anger, to be able to learn how to get along with others. And in the same way that we deal with other academic subjects, we need to think of social emotional that same way. The kids might not have that, and we don't punish them because they don't yet have those skills. We give them the resources to support them in developing those skills. And I love this. This is from actually Anchorage, Alaska, that talks about these sort of 4 dimensions of self-awareness, self-management, social awareness, and social management, and some skills for adults. So self-awareness, I see you, not acknowledging them. I believe in you. I care about you, and I support you. And to think about how we can communicate these things in an intentional way to students. So I basically have 3 take-home messages I want to give you at the beginning, just in case I forget at the end, but this will be the theme. The foundation of learning for everyone, is the creation of supportive, caring environments. So as Stacy mentioned, this resiliency approach, this idea, how do you create resiliency? Resiliency, I will tell you, is not within the person. Resilience is about the context. So what I loved about your tree metaphor, Stacy, there's something in that context that's supporting the development of that tree. And so that is about the context that supports that resiliency. So the idea of creating, so children feel loved, supported, and nurtured. I use the loved word. I know a lot of us in education don't use love, but I'm going to use it. I feel like I do. I love my students when I worked with them. You have to provide opportunities and specific skills that foster their social, emotional learning, their competencies, in the same way you do other kinds of subjects. They need support to learn these things, intentional ways that every day to support them. And finally, and I have to say this is, I put it last, but it's really the foundation, is that it's the educators, it's the adults' well-being that matters for all of this. You cannot provide the support or teach the skills if you're not taken care of, if you're not supported, if you're, I'm talking about all of you in the collective we, how much we need to support the adults who surround these kids and taking time to support, for their own well-being. Actually, this is a whole new phenomenon in education, educator well-being, and the idea of providing the context to support them. So when I talk about social and emotional learning, a lot of people think it's about just teaching kids the skills. I actually say it's like a three-legged stool that's interrelated, that if you take one away, it falls over. One is, of course, the learning context, and then the SEL of the educators. What are we doing to support them on a daily basis? So why now? What are some of the things? I'm going to just go give you a couple of recent findings from some of the research about what children today are facing. You know, there's higher rates of anxiety and depression in young people today than ever before. They are facing so many challenges. We know there's increased levels of anxiety, particularly in relation to mental health. How many of you have seen increased anxiety in the educational context with your work? Just so many kids, there's so much of, you know, we could talk about many of the reasons. Is it social media? You know, what are the aspects that are creating the heightened levels of anxiety? You know, it is a tougher, you know, back in the day, I'll sort of date myself here, but, you know, when you just needed a college degree and you pretty much found a job. Now there's all kinds of stresses about getting into the workforce and times of jobs that have. We also know there's toxic stress. So some stress is okay, but toxic stress is that repeated everyday stress of many things working against you. And we know that this toxic stress can actually interfere with learning. So some of the research on toxic stress, which shows that actually when you're really highly stressed, you have a hormone called cortisol that increases dramatically. It goes really high. It's found in our saliva, and it increases. And if you have very high levels, especially young children who have these high levels of toxic stress, that it actually can do damage to a part of our brain called the prefrontal cortex. Some of you might have heard of the prefrontal cortex, working memory, decision, it's sort of self-regulation, self-control. So when children have had this toxic stress, it actually could damage this prefrontal cortex and look like attention deficit disorder. So toxic stress could actually lead to problems with self-regulation that looks like attention problems when it's actually the stress that's getting in there. So we know it interferes with learning, especially for children at risk, over time causes behavior problems. But again, getting back to the theme here, it's relationships that can provide the support. There's some research that we've done, I will tell you about this, that stress is contagious. Yes, like the common cold, like the flu, it's flu season right now, stress can be caught. And so even if you are not stressed, but you're around a small group of people with high levels of stress, you will actually have the negative physiological response to stress. We did a study, a colleague of mine, Ava Oberle, and I last year published where we actually measured teachers' levels of, this is grade 4 to 7 classrooms, measured teachers' levels of stress and burnout. And then for their 4th to 7th grade students, we collected the kids' cortisol. And yes, children like to give you their spit, just in case you were wondering. So we collected their saliva, their spit, to look at their cortisol. And we found that the classrooms with the teachers with the highest levels of stress and burnout had students with the highest levels of cortisol. So this stress contagion, now is it that these kids are coming in with higher levels of stress from the home, toxic stress, and teachers with their high empathy are catching it? Are teachers under so much stress and burnout that they're giving it over to the kids, or is it some combination of the two? Can't tell you the answer, but this idea of stress contagion, so if you see teachers who say they're so stressed, but then you look at the kids in their classroom, if you let them know, well, actually you're just catching the stress from the kids, is a really important way to go forward. So what now do we need to do? Really moving from ill-being to well-being. BC, I'd love to always say this, BC is leading the way in the world with this new redesign, the redesign of the curriculum by having a focus on the competencies. So we not only have the focus on the thinking competency, but we have, for the first time ever that I'm aware of across the world, have a focus on personal and social competency that's integrated in the K-12 curriculum. So things like positive personal and cultural identity, personal awareness and responsibility, and social awareness and responsibility are things that are now integrally related to the school system. So we now, basically, it gives you permission to do all of the stuff I was just talking about as part of the education. You don't have to kind of try and sneak it in on the side. It's really part of that thing. And it's really moving away from an intervention side where we wait till kids have a lot of problems and throw them the life preserver, to one in which we work on prevention and give them the life preserver, the toolkit that helps them stay afloat in terms of the social emotional domain. We know from Dan Goleman that IQ, for many years we thought IQ predicted how well you do in life. And now we know that it only accounts for 10 to 15% of life success. And the recent research is really showing that it's actually your social and emotional skills that predict how you do in life, not your IQ. That in fact, there was one study that looked at grade 3 students, social emotional competence, and grade 3 academic achievement, followed them up to grade 8, and looked at their grade academic achievement, and found that grade 3 social and emotional competence, particularly pro-sociality, how you got along with others was a better predictor of grade 8 academic achievement than was grade 3 academic achievement. Moreover, aggression was not predictive of how you did in grade 8. That pro-sociality, how you got along with others, how you cooperated, was a much better predictor. So the science is really showing that some people call them non-cognitive skills, social emotional skills, are much better predictors of success in school and in life. And so if you really want to help kids, you use intentional ways to promote this. As I said, social emotional learning is this growing movement. Castle identifies these 5 dimensions, including self-awareness, self-management, responsible decision-making, relationship skills, and social awareness. And as I said before, social emotional fitness is the way to go. Okay, so now I'm going to give you a couple of the recent findings with some practical strategies related and some time to connect and reflect about these things. Okay, so the first finding, and it sort of follows up what I was just saying, that there was a study done that looked at social and emotional skills in kindergarten, whether they predicted your life success. So they followed these kids from kindergarten 19 years later. And in kindergarten, they assessed the kids in terms of how well they got along with others, how much they listened, cooperated, or pro-social skills. And they followed them up, 753 kids. And so what did they find just from in kindergarten? They found that students with high pro-social skills in kindergarten were more likely to graduate from high school, earn a college degree, and find stable employment. Just from those skills in kindergarten. Those students with low skills and social emotional were more likely to have spent time in juvenile detention, been arrested by early adulthood, have a higher rate of recent binge drinking, and also higher chance of being on a wait list for public housing. Just from how you were in kindergarten with your social and emotional skills and getting along with others. What's important here, which leads to the finding number 2, is that these skills are malleable. What we know now through research on neuroplasticity is that you can teach these skills. Things like empathy, self-regulation, self-awareness, that you can actually teach these skills early on. So wouldn't it be interesting to start thinking at kindergarten how kids are doing social emotional and how do you build in the scaffolding to help them learn those skills instead of just focusing on the academic achievement. And actually, when you start looking at readiness for school, you know what the best predictor of how ready you are for school? It's not your reading or literacy or numeracy. It's your self-regulation. It's how able you are to regulate, wait your turn, get along with others, all of those things much more likely to predict social emotional. We know that social emotional learning programs affect students. There's one study that actually showed that they looked at kids who were in social and emotional learning programs and compared them to kids who were not. And I'll mention some of the social emotional learning programs, like here it would be the Friends for Life, Roots of Empathy, Mind Up, things like that. And they found that the students who were in those programs had an 11 percentile achievement test higher, as well as social emotional skills and achievement as well. So this idea of how much do you focus on the academics and how much do you focus on the social emotional? You know, again, it's kind of it's what we call a paradigm shift in academics. There's, again, I put in some resources here. You could go and look up this Castle guide, has one of all the, if you wanted to go to like the better, Good Housekeeping, Seal of Approval, or Better Business Bureau of SEL programs, they've already done all the work, and you can go say, what are the effective programs? Who do they work for? Do they work with special populations? How much do they cost? And there's actually one for middle and high school, which is often sort of the left out area of everything in this, I have to say. Everything focuses on elementary, so little on high school, and they have a whole program guide. The other finding is that these, so you say, okay, we're going to invest all this time, early intervention, we're going to work with these kids early on with the social emotional skills, but does it last? Does it really benefit? Another study found, they looked at the kids who had the social emotional learning program in high school, in elementary school, and followed them up into adulthood. One study by David Hawkins and colleagues, and found that actually those kids who were in the social emotional learning programs versus those who were not, were more likely to not only graduate from high school, earn a college degree, find stable employment, have fewer mental health problems, but they were also more likely to be involved in their community and vote. Which is, again, so interesting if we think about what the purpose of education is. The other finding, have any of you ever heard of self-regulation? I'm guessing you have a bit, or self-control. And a lot of the recent work in the past several years, actually with Stuart Shanker and many others, is based on this one study, I have to say. Many of it was spurred by a study by Terry Moffat and colleagues in Dundee in New Zealand, who followed a group of kids, 1,000 kids, from birth to age 32. And they looked at all these measures and wanted to say, at age 32, what predicts how you manage your finances, your mental health problems, your relationships, your stable employment. And they identified one single factor that was the best predictor, that was the most powerful, and it was self-control. So it led to a number of different projects and interventions to focus on self-control. And has any of you heard of the marshmallow test? I'm guessing you've all seen the marshmallow video, right? It's so fun. Watch these kids. Walter Mischel, he did this study looking at kids would eat the marshmallow. Could they resist temptation? And found that those kids, in fact, they found all kinds of findings that of the kids who could wait, the preschoolers, they could wait, that 30% of 4-year-olds could wait, that those children who could wait scored higher on their college entrance exams, that the failure to wait predicted all sorts of problems. But there's kind of a secret they didn't tell you about this research. And a couple of years ago, I was at a conference in Boston, and I actually had the pleasure of having dinner. One of the other speakers was Walter Mischel, the marshmallow guy, the guy who started the whole thing. Charming man in his 80s, so neat. And so at dinner, can you imagine? It's so fun. You get to ask him whatever. And so I'm saying, what else? And he said, the thing they didn't really emphasize was the relationships. Was the adult. He said, we spent a lot of time getting the kids to feel comfortable with the adult, the research assistant who was doing that. So some ways to promote self-regulation, I'm sure you know many different ways. There's, with younger kids, I think we, again, really reiterating how important it is to scaffold them specifically with giving them the strategies. This one's, has anyone ever heard of the PATHS curriculum? Promoting Alternative Thinking Skills? It's a great curriculum. It's for children in elementary school. In the younger grades, they use the turtle. I think his name's Toby, the turtle, where the children learn to do turtle so that when they have to self-regulate, when something happens, they are like a turtle and they go in their shell. They have to learn to think. Again, very specific strategy. When they get older, they use the stoplight. Some of you know the zones of regulation. It's all that same concept of those strategies. One of my favorite things that I'm seeing in classrooms throughout BC are these calm down corners. Has anyone seen them? Hopefully many. Some people call them reset stations. I've seen chillaxin stations. The kids help make that one up. Where they can self-regulate. So they go to the corner, they can choose where they can either do breathing, they can put headphones on and watch some beautiful scenes of nature. Again, they can do all sorts of things to self-regulate. So it's not like you're going to be punished. You behave badly, you have to go to the principal's office and sit out on the chair. You instead go to this station where you can reset. And actually, some schools are even taking it further in the US where they have Zen rooms. Have you heard of the Zen rooms yet? or the mindfulness rooms, where kids can actually go to a classroom and practice mindfulness or self-regulation strategies or do yoga or things like that. So again, it's about not punishing kids, but giving them the strategies of what to do next time when they feel themselves doing that. Mind Up is, have any of you heard of Mind Up? The Mind Up program. You actually have Molly Lawler here tomorrow afternoon, and she's going to be talking about Mind Up, or tomorrow morning, I think, talking about Mind Up, which she actually helped write the curriculum. So you'll be good where they know that kids can practice these mindfulness practices of pausing and listening and breathing. There's also a great program for adolescents, I want to say, that really is effective. The other thing that I really want to emphasize in terms of the recent science, that we've actually underestimated children's capacities for being helpful and kind. We often look at kids, and it's kind of interesting how we've characterized, especially young children and teenagers. I think that they're the most maligned. Toddlers and early adolescents. You know, they're seen as aggressive, impulsive, self-centered. But there's research now that is debunking that characterization, saying that in fact, we are all born to be good. That by nature, through evolution, we actually have a motivation. We are intrinsically motivated to help others, to be kind. And some of this work is happening. Actually, Dr. Keltner, who's out of the Greater Good Science Center, said it's not survival of the fittest, it's actually survival of the kindest. What we know from the research on being kind and helpful actually creates endorphins in your brain. Even when you watch someone else helping another person, you actually get a happiness boost. You get this benefit. So what they did is they did this study with those toddlers, and for one group of kids who helped, they gave a toy. They said, you help, here's your toy, thank you very much, it's your reward. Another group, they just said, oh, thank you very much for helping me, that was so helpful. And another group, the adults said nothing. Which group do you think stopped helping the next time? Which one? The one that got the toy. The reward, the extrinsic reward, actually undermined the altruistic tendencies. So again, what does that say? If we're naturally programmed to be kind and helpful, you know, I actually think kids are like, okay, so you gave, I liked helping, but now you gave me this reward. Maybe there was some ulterior motive you had. Maybe it wasn't supposed to be so good. But again, thinking forward about that and thinking about, you know, different programs we could bring in. Roots of Empathy, actually, how many have heard of Roots of Empathy? Imagine a few of you have. A program that brings an infant in the classroom where children every month do kind things for the children, learn about that kindness. Another one is a great program called the Kindness in the Classroom by the Random Acts of Kindness Foundation, where they have, I put this up here, they have free lessons, K to 12. You have to just go and look at it, and there's K to 12 lesson plans that are amazing. It's all free. Did I mention free? They're all free. And then a recent one that's actually really great, it's for preschool and kindergarten, and it's called the Kindness Curriculum that brings in mindfulness. And again, it's free. Science-based curriculum available at the Center for Healthy Minds. Did you notice I brought a few things that are free? I'm guessing you'd like free stuff. So now to sort of to bring in sort of the most important thing, it's kind of been the circulars, that the relationships are central to all of this. The importance of relationships coming from the science of resiliency. We know from attachment theory, I'm guessing a few of you have heard of attachment theory. You know, from Bowlby, he talks about human beings of all ages are happiest and able to deploy their talents to best advantage when they have trusted others standing behind them. We know from 5 decades of resiliency research, the single most important factor in promoting resiliency are relationships. And those kids who do well versus those kids who do not, it's a supportive adult relationship. And it doesn't have to be the parent. I mean, I always have to say it could be that one adult in school, it could be that neighbor, it could be someone else. That one supportive relationship is so critical. And this is the Center on the Developing Child at Harvard University. At least one committed relationship. This one I love. It's a favorite quote. Every child requires someone in his or her life who's absolutely crazy about them. And thinking about that. And that is actually the glue of it all, that brings it all together, those relationships. for social emotional. And I love this one. Students don't care how much you know until they know how much you care. And the learning is really based on that. There's some research we did where we asked kids, are there any adults at your school who are important to you? And found that those kids who could name at least one adult did better than those who mentioned no adult. But those kids who could name at least 2 adults or more in their school were higher in every dimension of social emotional competence. Empathy, optimism, self-esteem, the staircase from 0 adults to 1 adult to none. And when we asked them what were the things that made teachers supportive or educators, the adults, it was not just teaching, it was actually nurturing and supportive. Listening to me when I have something to say. They said things like, she makes me forget all the bad things in my life, listens to me, very kind, I can talk to him, he's always gentle. Other things, she cares about people's feelings, she'll not just help you and send you off, but she'll check back with you. He's kept me on the path to being great. I mean, it'd be interesting to ask kids, what are the things that make adults important to you? How much do we actually talk to students about that? As we did a study at King George Secondary years ago, Shelley Emil and I, and asked kids from high honor roll kids to average kids to kids at risk. And we asked them, what do teachers do to show they care? And do you know the single most important one that all 3 mentioned? That teacher says hi to me in the hallway by my name. It's, I see you. You matter to me. I want to end, and so hopefully you get a chance to talk about that video and think about what are those little things, again, thinking about what does the learning context create, what about the adults, and this idea of the strategies to promote supportive, positive relationships. So I'm going to give you one challenge to do as you move forward and go into schools. I'm going to do the 2x10, it's called. I want you to find, do you have any annoying students with whom you work? Or maybe with the people who you work with, and it's actually in the PowerPoint. So what you do is you find that challenging, annoying student, challenging, good word, annoying, and for 2 minutes a day, for 10 days, find a way to have a positive conversation with them. Find a way to have a positive interaction with them and see what happens. It's a bit of an action research project. You can see how you're doing, but I think if I leave you with one other message, how important it is to take care of your own well-being. As you saw in the video, when adults are stressed, it leaks out. It leaks out to kids in all sorts of ways. You think it might not be, but it does. And what can we do to promote our own well-being in an intentional way and create context where the adults are well taken care of? Thank you.